Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad. I'm sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, and we're here to talk Seahawks football, specifically getting back into our draft prospect series. We are now starting on the defensive side of the ball as we ramp up towards the NFL draft. This week's show looking at defensive tackles, nose tackles, as part of the defensive lines. We are not going to touch, or briefly, we might touch a couple of guys that can play all along the defensive line as far as scheme versatility is concerned, but we're going to focus on the bigger guys that are in the 300 plus pound range, sometimes 320, 330. There's a lot of guys in this draft. So there's been years in the past, year before last, I think, year before that, there were one or two guys in the draft that touched 325 pounds on the defensive tackle side of the ball that had draft grades, Keith. This year is quite different. This year,
yes,
you've got maybe a dozen players that have draftable grades that are going to be over, let's just say 310 pounds or in that range or heavier, guys that play true nose tackle, 0-1 tech kind of guys, 3 tech, maybe a little bit, and just a lot of different bodies and types of players and athleticism to choose from at all levels of the draft. And if Seattle wants to come away with a big bodied guy, a space eater, take on double teams, the guy that plays the run really well, they're going to have a lot of options in this draft.
They really are. And this is a good draft to do that. Last year, there was one. I mean, there was legitimately one. And this year, you've got probably 9 that I like as a true nose tackle, which is great. This is a team that's needed one for quite a while. And to get a guy that is a true nose tackle would be great for them. I think we should probably talk a little bit about, you mentioned the defensive end versus defensive tackle. In this system where you're playing a 3-4, a defensive end in a 3-4 is a guy that's like, 280, 290, up to 310. This isn't the 250 pound, speed guy. Those are outside linebackers in this system. And so, guys that are in that 280, 290 range are harder to come by. That's the position that becomes difficult to solve in a 3-4. Where in a 4-3, those guys don't really have a home because they're too small to play inside and they're too big to, be an edge setter. And so, the system has different needs, right? And so, you just got to look at this, and the Seahawks have made this commitment to this 3-4, and they got to find the guys to do it. And one of the things you need is a guy in the very middle, the nose tackle, the guy right in the center that usually weighs 330, 340, and is just impossible to move. Keeps the linebackers clean against the run. Eats up space, all of that kind of stuff. That's not an easy thing to find either. And so that's really kind of what we're looking at here. There's some other guys that we can talk about that are more versatile, that can, line up at different spots in the line. But really it comes down, at least for me, to do you get a guy that's, can you find a guy that's big enough to really anchor that middle? And the Seahawks, they kind of had that last year. But they haven't had that really in a long time. The closest thing they've had is Brian Monet years ago, and he was like, a backup at best. So yeah,
they did have Jonathan Hankins last year.
Yeah, but he's on the downside of his career, like
right.
Well onto the down. He wasn't productive. He didn't do nearly as much. He just happens to fit the body type, but he's an old guy who doesn't have the athleticism anymore and all of that kind of stuff. Like they need a true.
And he's not back this year. Yeah. So right now, they really don't have that on the roster. You want to say Cameron Young or Brandon Peely, Quentin Bohanna. Those are guys, practice squad level guys. Obviously, Cameron Young's never really made an impact since he was drafted.
He just always hurt.
Jaron Reed and Byron Murphy can slide inside and play that zero tech if needed, but that's not their normal position. Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy, they're going to be 3 techs to 5 tech guys as far as the scheme versatility goes. So they really don't have that big guy. Now, there's guys in the draft. You'd mentioned guys that can play all over the place. Well, we've already got a couple of those guys. Mason Graham's another example. He's going to be at the top of the draft, 6'4", 296 from Michigan. He can play everything from zero tech to 5 tech, and he will, and he's going to do a great job. He kind of comps, I think, to a Byron Murphy, a guy like that plays very physical. He's a lot bigger than Byron Murphy, though, as far as the height and length. So it'd be interesting to kind of see how they play him. He has been up as high as 320 pounds, though, in the past. So he could play that zero tech for you, but he's not. He's going to be long gone by the time the Seahawks draft.
Yeah, and he's a guy that, at being in the 290s, if he were to be drafted by Seattle, they would view him as a 5. To be there with Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy kind of as a defensive end in this system. Not that true nose. Could he bulk back up to 320 where he once was and play that? Sure, but that's not using your assets in their most effective way. But he's also going to be gone in the top 10. This guy's just too good. If he gets past 10, I'll be shocked.
So one of the guys I really like in this draft, and a guy that's kind of been hanging around anywhere from 15 to 25 range as far as where he's slotted in the draft, is Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle, nose tackle from Michigan again. 6'4", 331. He's been up as high as 360 pounds, but ran a sub 5.0 at 360 pounds when he was at Michigan. But he runs a 4.95 at 331. He's still 21 years old. He's an athletic freak. He's got the ability to give you a little bit of push as far as the pass rush is concerned. That's what kind of makes him intriguing, because you could really leave him in there all the time. Like, I think he, instead of playing, 30% of the snaps like Jonathan Hankins would play, you could easily see him being in there for at least 50%, 55, 60% of the snaps, just because, he's going to take on those double teams. He's going to give you all the leverage you need on the inside. He's going to be able to eat up all that space, stop the run. He's going to be excellent at that, but also he's going to be able to push that pocket, affect the pass rush a little bit, put pressure on the quarterback, sometimes even get there, because he's got that quick first step and burst, and he's just a strong, huge human.
He's just huge.
Yeah. What do you think about Kenneth Grant at 18 if he was there?
Honestly, I freaking love him. And whenever I do mock drafts, he's always there at 18 or 21 if I move back slightly. And I'm so tempted to take him, even though we don't think of it as like, ooh, this is the need. This is the first round draft pick, that they need to go use. He's sitting there. He's so good. And it fits a need, even though it's not a major need. He's a really good player. And I just think he fits Mike McDonald. I just, every time he's there, I debate, do I take him or do I actually do something else in the draft?
How important, we've talked about this many different times, Keith, over the years. How important is it to have a true nose tackle in a 3-4 defense? Because if you don't really have one, you don't have one, and it really does affect the way that you can scheme up. And you're moving now guys around. You're playing guys like Byron Murphy and Jaron Reed at the zero tech because that's all you have, versus having a dedicated guy that you have that plays that position and really allows all the other guys on the defensive line to do their jobs even better.
Yeah, I think it is important, especially against the run. You've got to keep your linebackers clean. And a guy like that big in the middle, if you're trying to run up the middle, you have to commit a double team to him. And that eats up a blocker. It keeps your linebacker clean. The linebacker can now float into the hole and make the tackle for a 1 or 2 yard gain at the most. That's really what doing that. When you've got an undersized player there, then a combo block where they get initially double teamed, and then once they start to move, they release up onto the linebacker. You're not keeping the linebacker clean at all. You're making it a lot harder for the linebacker to come up into the hole and make that play. And so having that true nose tackle really solves those interior runs in a way that you just can't solve when you've got smaller guys.
So when you said initially that it wasn't a big need,
I'm saying it's not a big need in terms of, you look at your defensive line and you've got your Williams and Reed and Murphy, and you're like, well, there's your starting defensive line, and you've got a little bit of depth here and that kind of stuff, and you're like, okay, there's other things that are more glaring, but honestly, that true nose tackle, that true one or zero tech, the guy that can just line up and dominate a center, so they have to put a guard in there to help, is something that they need. And so, yeah, to me, I mean, that's part of why when he's sitting there for these drafts, and I'm like, I have a hard time passing on him. He's just too good.
Here's where you kind of get into the positional value conversation, because most of these guys we're going to talk about today are dedicated run stopping kind of gap filler double team guys that don't necessarily affect the pass rush. The interesting thing about Ken Grant is that he does. So yeah, he's going to be your true nose tackle. He is going to take on double teams. He's going to allow other people to get to the quarterback easier, better, faster, make the whole defensive line work better. But he also gives you that's why he's up there, at 18 is he's going to give you that plus stuff on rushing the passer. So,
can he push the pocket, make it so the quarterback can't step up to avoid the edge rushers? That's the kind of stuff that makes Kenneth Grant worthy of a first round pick rather than a second or third. Because, in the modern NFL, you pass a lot more than you run. And it's more important that you have a way to pressure the quarterback. And so, a lot of guys that are that big, that are the true nose, they get pushed down in the draft because they don't help you on passing downs. But I think Kenneth Grant can. I think he will. I think he's that good. And to me, that's the plus. That's the reason why I think first round pick for him is worth it. Especially
he would be on the short list for me as far as players that I think will be on Seattle's board, and they would consider taking at 18 if they needed to stick and pick or drop back a little bit. There's obviously going to be offensive guards, / tackles available there. There's going to be other positional value, maybe wide receiver that drops to you that you'd consider, or a tight end, for example. But I think that, solving the issues in the trenches, whether it be on offense or defense, is really kind of where it's at in the first round, because those are guys that are hard to come by on second contracts, especially if they work out. They don't see the open market. So this would be a great way to acquire that. Walter Nolan is interesting to me because I think he had a great Senior Bowl, really kind of showed up. But he's got 32.5-inch arms, so very short, not long, 6'4", 296. He's one of those guys that's penciled in, slide around. He's
a defensive end in Seattle's scheme.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on that. He's got the agility, but I think his length dictates that he's probably more of a 0 to 3 tech, in my opinion. I don't know that he's going to end up playing a lot at the 5. I think he's going to end up putting on a little bit more weight. To me, he's one of those guys where you get him, you might try him, on multiple fronts and move him around a little bit, but I think he sticks. He ends up being better on the inside than he is outside, and
I think that's his path. I think he's too small for the interior.
6'4", 300 pounds. I mean, with 32-inch arms, like where else is he going to play?
I think he's going to play at the 5 because you put him inside at the 0 or the 0-1 or the 3, and he's going to get pushed around. I think you put him at the 5 where he's on the outside slightly, but still not truly on the outside.
He's the same. He's the same weight and so forth as Byron Murphy.
Murphy was over 300. He was like 310.
308.
So we're talking, 15-pound different.
Yeah, but no, this guy played at like 307 pounds when he was in college, but weighed in at the Senior Bowl and Combine a little lighter, so he could put up his 494, 495, 40.
Yeah.
But he plays a little heavier. I just think that he is a leverage guy. I think he's a very strong guy. I think he really showed up at the Senior Bowl. I mean, he had one of the best Senior Bowl weeks of any player, especially on the defensive side. Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think he's a guy that could line up at the 5, but I think he's going to end up being one of those guys that they move around depending on matchups. Like, if they've got a guard that can't really match up against an athletic interior defensive lineman, I think he could have a lot of success inside, but that's just me.
Yeah. I'm looking at, you look at this. I'm more interested in a guy like Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State.
Love him. Oh man, one of my favorite players, underrated favorite players in this draft.
6'3", 327. The guy is just a legit athlete. And
ran a 4.68 at that. It ran a 4.68 at 334 pounds.
Yeah. And just is big, athletic, aggressive, just is dominant. He's just dominant. And I'm not sure why the draft media has him ranked, as a guy who's going to be a second-round pick. He screams first-round talent to me. And I must be missing something because I just look at him and I'm like, this is a guy who's going to come in and be good at the next level. And he's going to do so at 335 pounds. That's a nose tackle with tremendous athleticism that can get up into the middle and affect the quarterback and offer you that 3-down potential. And we're a guy that can play 60% of the snaps for you. That's rare to find at a guy that size.
I agree. I mean, the guy had a 1.62 10-yard split at 330 pounds.
He's going to overwhelm guards.
That's elite. That's elite. And and the power shows up, the weight room power. He's on Bruce Feldman's freak list. He's got the burst, the balance, everything you're looking for. I agree. I think he's one of the most underrated guys. If you go look at big boards and so forth, he's always in that 40 to 55 range. And I'd love to see him be there at 50 if Seattle's picking at that range.
Any way he's there that late?
I do not.
What am I missing
either.
that makes him a guy that would be picked in the 50s and not the 20s?
He's got it all to me. I mean, Ohio State. He plays against good competition. He's been consistent. 53 tackles and 10 tackles for loss in 2023. Followed that up with 46 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and 2.5 sacks, despite missing 2 games in 2024. He just got that alpha dog mentality as well. Team captain on the defense. I love him for that spot. Now, some people will question whether or not he's going to be able to get to the quarterback consistently. And that's where I think he falls down a little bit, because if he's one-dimensional at the NFL level, I'm not saying he will be. I'm just saying if teams view him as one-dimensional, that could push your stock down a little bit. And maybe that's coming into play a little bit. But I think he's got the power and the agility, the lateral agility, and to be able to be a bit more than that at the NFL level. And I see him as he's like Kenneth Grant part 2. Like to me, they're interchangeable as far as their value to a team.
Yeah. And that's why I was saying, like, I'm very intrigued by that. And the only thing that I see when I looked at his tape is occasionally he popped up too fast and got his pads too high. That is coachable. I mean, sorry, that's something that a good coach can teach him some more discipline to keep his pads down. I'm not knocking a guy down 2 rounds in the draft because he just needs a little bit of coaching. There's so much athleticism and dominance in his tape, and against top level talent.
Yes.
Right, against top talent, top offenses. I'm confused.
Well, and it's that agility that sets him apart. Like, to me, I think, totally top of the second round, at the latest. Like, if Seattle wants him, for example, and they're targeting him, they would have to be in either take him after dropping back off 18, or you would have to, pick up an early second by trading around to go get him. So we'll see. I mean, you might fall in love with a player, but if he's not going to be in where you're slotted in the draft, you may not be able to get to him. But
you just have to be willing to move around a little bit.
Would you consider it a reach if they liked him better than Kenneth Grant and targeted him at 18?
No. I mean, I know that everyone would, because they're going to look at these the media big boards and be like, oh my God, this is a guy that's in the 30s or 40s, and Seahawks are taking him at 18. But if the Seahawks are taking him at 18, it's because they have him rated at that level. And honestly, I would have him rated at that level. And if I do, there's going to be other NFL teams that have it figured out. And so if that's where you have to if you love the guy and that's where you have to take him to get him, take him there. I don't consider that a reach. I consider that a really good investment. You have the 18th overall pick and you take a dominant defensive lineman. Yeah, that seems about right. That's what you do with the 18th overall pick. You take dominant defensive linemen. Okay, go for it.
So one of those players, if they pick and decide to address this position at 50 or 52, would be Alfred Collins, the defensive tackle out of Texas. Now, it's a completely opposite player than the player we just talked about in Tyleik Williams. In Tyleik Williams, 330 pounds, but he's like got the agility for days. He's super athletic, all that kind of stuff, super productive. Alfred Collins is a true old school nose tackle with virtually like a 6th percentile agility in athleticism. Yeah. Like, he's going to be in a phone booth. He's also 23 and a half years old. To me, I'm not drafting Alfred Collins only because I think he's overvalued for what he truly brings to the table, which he's going to be an amazing guy that's going to take up 2 gaps and he's going to take on double teams and he's going to stop the run for you. But that's it. That's where it starts and that's where it ends.
Yep. If you go back to the version of the 3-4 that the Seahawks were running at the end of Pete Carroll's era, where they were asking guys like Leonard Williams to 2-gap, which was insanely stupid, then you are looking at Alfred Collins as a very valuable piece because he can 2-gap. He can stack a guard, and he is very good at reading what's going on, shedding a tackle, or shedding a block and making a tackle in the hole. But he's not going to provide push. He's not going to do that. If you're looking for a 2-gapping defensive tackle, Alfred Collins is your guy. But if you're looking for a guy that's going to penetrate and be like disruptive in the backfield,
or scheme diverse, right?
Yeah, he's not your guy because you're
he's
right.
He's not going to slide up and down the line.
His broad jump was in the 6th percentile,
right?
For his 4, and that's 4 defensive tackles.
Yes,
like the guy is he
big. Had a 26-inch vertical. He can barely get off the ground. Right.
He's big. He's strong. And he's smart in terms of his ability to diagnose plays and that kind of stuff. But he is not explosive. And so Yeah. You know
Now,
what you're getting.
NFL mock draft simulator, mock draft data big board, which is a aggregate big board, has him at 61 overall. Is he worth a mid second round pick or a late second round pick?
No.
Based on just that skill level that we just talked about and the skills he would bring to a team, while valuable, offer very little versatility.
Yeah. I just think he's going to be very good at one thing. And
the best, potentially the best run stuffing defensive tackle in this draft, potentially.
If you are a team that utilizes your defensive lineman in a two gapping situation, he is perfect for your team.
So he would be better in a 4-3 front.
No, he'd be better in a traditional 3-4.
Really?
Because in a 4-3, you've got four linemen.
Because you could have one of these guys, but then you could have your more athletic defensive tackle next to him. Maybe that would make sense to me.
Well, I mean, Pete Carroll. Let's go back to the Pete Carroll. When Pete Carroll first came into the NFL from USC, he would have put Alfred Collins at the 5 tech, which would have annoyed the hell out of people because that's a defensive end position in the 3-4. But that's what he did to Red Bryant. This guy is essentially Red Bryant part 2. He's big, 320 pounds. He's great at two gapping, but offers you nothing in terms of pass rush and the ability to penetrate. And so the ability to attack two gaps is it's not a thing that most teams ask guys to do because it tends to not be what their players are good at. When you value and you acquire talent that's explosive, that's got a quick first step, that does things to try and be disruptive, asking them to two gap is wasting their talent. And in a traditional 3-4, that's what you did with all three of your defensive linemen, is you ask all three of them to two gap. And so that way you had coverage of the gaps from your defensive line, and it would allow your linebackers to roam more and that kind of stuff. But in a 4-3, in a traditional 4-3, everybody one gaps because you've got 4 gaps taken care of just by your defensive linemen. And as long as your backside linebacker is willing to, stay home and worry about the cutback lane, then you're fine. You've got all the gaps accounted for, and you've got 2 guys able to flow to the ball. But everything's evolved. Everything's evolved so much. So when you go to like what the Seahawks ran last year in this 3-4, is they were asking their defensive tackles to one gap, even in a 3-4, which yes, leaves 2 gaps open. One of them on the back side and one of them on the front side. But you've got, bigger outside linebackers who can handle those responsibilities. You've got a safety down in the box that can pick up some of the flow to the ball responsibilities. And so it's a different alignment and a different way of doing it. But yeah, if you go back 20 years, what Seattle is doing with their 3-4 would have been like blasphemous. But it really started with when Harbaugh was with the 49ers and that defense. He's the one who like really started getting one gapping 3-4 and making it work. And it's kind of evolved from there. And honestly, McDonald is part of the Harbaugh tree. So it does make a little bit of sense, but that's what they do. They're a 3-4 defense that one gaps as if they're a 4-3, and they attack. And I love it, but it means a guy like Alfred Collins is probably not on your draft board at all.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Next guy, TJ Sanders, again, is a guy that's going to be, 3 tech to 5 tech kind of a guy.
Mm-hmm.
But still going to be 3rd round level talent. I think, any of the guys that we're talking about would be great additions to have on your team. I'm just not sure of his fit on the Seahawks.
What about Gianni Walker out of Kentucky? 6'6", 345.
Yeah.
I've
even got him at 6'7". He's a slow guy. He's young. He's got great length, but he's lower on the agility spectrum than you'd want. 15th percentile on a lot of different things. But the sheer mass of the human being, and his lateral ability, yeah, I mean, he'd definitely be a guy that you would have inside. I don't know. I mean, he's not going to give you much when it comes to rushing the passer at all. It's just going to strictly be, I think, taking away a couple gaps and potentially double teams and stopping the run. But
Yeah,
I like him.
I think he offers more long-term potential as a pass rusher than anything right away. But you're right; he can come in and be that two down nose tackle for you. You know, the year one play. 40% of your snaps, maybe 35, somewhere in that range. But he needs to rework his body. He needs to get stronger on his lower half, get more explosive, build up some conditioning so that he can attack the quarterback more on passing downs before he's ready to do that.
So what his body type, Keith, and they're currently, you mentioned reworking it, but just currently at 6'6", 6'7", at 330 pounds, talk to me about leverage with a player like that. Like, he's never going to be able to get down and under like Poona Ford could. So do you have, if that's the case, if you have to approach it from a different perspective, like, how does he play and still be effective?
Well, I mean, he's got to learn to keep his pads down and not let the guards get underneath him. But he can also use that extreme length to his advantage and get in on the offensive lineman's body rather than keeping him at hand's length, because he's longer than them. You can get to their body before they can get to yours, and so you can get in there, push them, knock their arms out of the way, and not. So
he'd be kind of a bull rush kind of a guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you could develop that in him. He's just so freaking long. But you're right as far as leverage. If you let, in a situation where both guys get, hands on each other and it's just a pushing match, the other guy's going to be underneath him. He's going to be lifting him, and he's going to have a hard time, even at that size. But with that length, he should be able to avoid letting guards get into his body and, win that way. I don't know. He's huge. I'm surprised. I'm actually genuinely surprised that no one along the way converted him to offensive tackle. At 6'6" or 6'7". Like, why was he never moved over to the offense?
Well, his agility is not great. I mean, he's probably too slow to anchor an edge. I
don't know.
That would be my guess.
He's got the length to do it now.
True.
But his workout routine would be very different to develop different things. And I think that you could, I just go back 3 years and convert him to offensive tackle, and I think he'd be pretty damn good.
You sound like an offensive line coach that you really don't like.
No, I'm not, because I'm not saying, oh, I'm going to do it, I'm going to fix him. No, I'm saying, like, it's too bad that no one thought about this early in his college days, because that's when
it's not too late. He's only 21. He's got time.
No. The instincts aren't there at this point. Do not compare me to Tom Cable again.
Tom Cable would completely disagree with you. And so would the 5 or 6 conversion projects that he took on when he was a coach.
Yes, and one of them kind of worked, and the rest of them were absolute failures. So
true. Talk about the desperate situation that, as an offensive line coach, that you're digging that far into other prospects to solve your issues because you just don't have enough athleticism in the college ranks to give you an opportunity to have a normal, natural guards and offensive tackles to work with. You've got to go poach them off the defensive side.
See, I
can see where that's an issue.
I don't think that was true. I think this was just ego. That you give me the most athletic guy you can find that's more athletic than the guys I've got, and I can teach them to do all the offensive line things. And it doesn't matter that they've never played the position and don't have any coaching, before now. I'm good enough that I can fix them. I think it was just pure ego, and not, oh, we don't, the talent's not there, we have to go to the defensive line, because no other team was doing that. The talent was good enough for the other 31 teams. Why wasn't it for Tom Cable?
How do you view Shermar Turner or like Joshua Farmer? Both guys around 300 pounds. Turner's 290, but the scheme versatility thing about him is he can play anywhere from the 0 to the 5 tech, etc. I think I would rather talk about him as a defensive end. And Joshua Farmer, kind of the same. I mean,
well, Farmer
average
played at 318 for most of his time at Florida State. And yeah, he dropped down for the combine in order to, put up some his agility numbers and whatever. But he was almost 320 for his playing weight. And if you look at his tape, okay, it's not always against the highest quality competition. But he was still in the backfield a lot. He was very disruptive. His ability to get between a guard and a center, and get upfield and just make life difficult with those guys in terms of the angles and stuff that they would have to take to block him. And I liked him as more of a situational interior pass rusher, more so than a 3-down defensive end. Because when you watch him against the run, there are times he's getting pushed back, but when he's allowed to attack and move forward and get into a gap, he can be really hard to block. So I actually like him as that, guy that comes in, can play 50-60% of the snaps in the NFL because it's such a passing league, but is definitely not there on short yardage, guaranteed running, situations. But instead is there 3rd and long, 2nd and long, 2-minute drill. Like, if you get a lead at all, he gets a lot of playing time because he can just get in between, into those gaps and create problems for quarterbacks.
So one of the prospects I've been kind of waiting to talk about and really want to talk about that would be available in the 4th, 5th round is Jordan Phillips out of Maryland. 6'2", 312 at the combine, but plays closer to 320 most of the time. He's only 20 years old still. He's in that 65 to 75% agility as far as the broad and the vertical and 3-cone, that sort of thing. Extremely strong wrestling background kind of a guy. Mm-hmm. I just like his potential. And, playing at Maryland and so forth has dropped him down a little bit. But I think he, if he's a guy that's playing at Ohio State, for example, I think that he's probably, going in the second, 3rd round range, as a guy that can come in, give you a little bit in that pass rush stuff, but really kind of hold the fort down, with heavy hands, stopping the run, taking on double teams and stuff.
Yeah. No, I like him. I think that his movement skills for a guy that's 320 plus puts him on my radar. Especially he's 20 years old. Like, yeah, he's gonna get better. His body, and
I think he's a perfect scheme fit.
Yeah. I would agree. If he was at Michigan instead of Maryland, we're not talking about him as a 4th rounder. We're talking about him as a 2nd rounder, because I just think his skill set and his abilities would be better appreciated there than at Maryland. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think he's the guy to watch, actually. If he matches up their profile, personality profile, their intangible things and so forth, he would be a guy that I think would be on their radar for sure, and potentially a guy to look at and draft value-wise in the 4th round, especially if you're addressing all those other position groups and so forth. He's a guy that can come in and really kind of make your roster and also be part of a rotation, I think, his first year, just because he's got that athleticism that enables him to get on the field right away. Another guy that's interesting to me that's not nearly as athletic as Jordan Phillips, but has all the skills that you would love to have for a true nose tackle is Jamari Caldwell out of Oregon. Like 5th percentile agility, like horrible. Plus he's got 32-inch arms, but he's a bowling ball, 6'2", 332 pounds, and basically just takes on blocks and stops the run. That's all he's going to give you. He's not going to give you anything else. He's just a run stuffer. But in the 4th, 5th round, I really like him.
I don't even have notes on him.
Really? Oh, man. I like him. Like, go check him out. Jamari Caldwell from Oregon.
I will.
I think, he's an interesting guy, but he was really the centerpiece of what Oregon did on defense, allowing guys like Harmon, their 3-5 tech guy, to be able to, Birch, to be able to go around and make plays. And anyway, interesting guy.
Interesting. I'm like, it's weird when we do these and all of a sudden you bring up a name. I'm like, I don't even have anything on that person.
Well, one of the prospects, I think you'll know, this one, the JJ Pegues, his ability to run the ball on offense is what's given him a name and what's put him on the radar as far as
from Ole Miss.
The Seahawks, looking for a guy that can play fullback once in a while, short yardage situation guy, but also, he's a 6'2", 305, 310 pound defensive tackle. Not super athletic, but he's kind of made his claim to fame with this short yardage stuff. Like he's scored, 5 or 6 touchdowns in college as a short area running back, close to the line of scrimmage, that sort of thing. And works kind of as a 6th offensive lineman once in a while and that sort of thing. So,
which is,
it's
just weird. He at 6'2", 325, like, yeah, okay, he could be a guard. But it's just so odd that you have guys when they do that, where he's that big, he's 325 and you're going to play him at fullback. I got to tell you, no linebacker is going to want to see him coming through a hole. But at the same time, does he have the speed to stay ahead of your running back?
Yeah, that's funny.
Or is your running back going to be running into him?
He's a 5'1" guy, so probably not.
Yeah. But I mean, there's some interesting. Stories like that are they're just fun.
They're fun. Yes.
Yeah.
The only other guy, there's a couple. Well, there's only one more true nose tackle I wanted to mention on my list there's Stackhouse from Georgia. How about you?
I was going to say that is a true nose tackle name. Stackhouse.
Yes.
Because if you think about like traditionally what you're asking a nose tackle to do, right? Stack the line of scrimmage, and be just the size of a house. His name is Stackhouse. Just sign him up. Like,
yeah, right.
was that the recruiting
right.
process?
No doubt.
Didn't even scout him. Just sign him to a scholarship and bring him in.
He is an interesting guy at the end of the draft. 6th, 7th round if he's there. 6'4", 327 pounds. He's 22 years old. He doesn't really have the agility. He's going to hold down the center of a defense. He gives you elite run stopping ability. His strength at the point of attack is just totally elite. And basically that's it. That's the deal. That's what you're getting. You're just getting a big human who stops the run. The end. And at that point in the draft, you're looking for guys that do one thing really well, or play special teams. So if he's got one skill and he does it really well, that's where you're going to find him in the draft. And I wouldn't be opposed. We've got 10 picks. You might as well use them on a guy that can stop the run.
Yeah. one other guy that I want to talk about before we call this a show would be Darius Alexander out of Toledo.
Yeah, I was going to talk about him, I think, on the defensive end show, but go ahead.
Because he's 6'4", 305, and so yeah, he's a 3 or a 5 in this system. But you look at him, like just look at him when he's playing, and you're like, he seems really thin. Like he holds that 305 really well. And you're like, he could be 325 and not lose the explosiveness that he shows. I think you could have him put on an extra 20 pounds over a year.
I thought about that actually. I thought about that at 4'8", 40 at 305 pounds, right? And he went to the Senior Bowl. Seahawks met with him. So they are interested. Above average athlete. The mass and mobility, he changes direction like somebody that's 40 pounds lighter, like, they can play on the outside edge. And that does offer the scheme versatility. I mean, we can try to pigeonhole these guys. Okay, we're just going to talk about nose tackles and defensive tackles today. But there are certain guys in this draft, and he's one of them, that can line up for you all over the place, especially if you're to pick, you naturally gain a little bit of weight anyway, and muscle weight after a couple years in NFL weight room. And so if a guy's playing at 310, 315, but can move around still really well, you can line him up outside, play the 5 tech. He comes down and plays 3 and occasional nose. A guy like that's super valuable, especially in Mike McDonald's scheme, where that's the value. That's where he really, guys like Jaron Reed and Byron Murphy are guys that are really important to the defense, and he would be another guy in that rotation.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring him up is he's probably too small to play a true nose right now, but I think he could easily put on 10 or 15 pounds and not lose the explosiveness. And so now you've got a guy that's 325 playing in there, who's explosive as hell, and disruptive. And that
what do you think about his playing at Toledo?
It does make it a little harder to judge the tape because of the quality of competition, but when you've got lesser competition in front of you, you should dominate. And when I watched, hit the tape on him, he dominated. So I'm like,
and he showed up at the Senior Bowl and dominated. Like he had a great Senior Bowl week.
That's the kind of thing that when you play for Toledo, you better show up at the Senior Bowl and dominate. And I think he did. So I think he, like when we first started like looking at draft stuff when the season ended, I was looking at him as like, 4th round or maybe late 3. Now he's looking like early 3, late 2nd. I think teams are finally starting to notice, or draft media starting to notice him, and he's going to continue creeping up on those consensus big boards.
Didn't the Seahawks draft a defensive end from Toledo way back in the day, like Lamar King or somebody like that? I can't remember.
That was actually when you said that, but he was 300 and some pounds defensive end, and Mike Holmgren was like, yeah, he offers you the 300-pound run stopping ability, but the pass rush also, and that's why he drafted him, and then he turned out to be nothing in the NFL.
It washed out.
One of the many reasons why Mike Holmgren, who's a good coach, was not a good GM.
And maybe it wasn't Toledo, but it was like some other small school.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Right. Interesting. Okay, cool. So next show, we'll come back and we'll talk about the other defensive linemen that we missed on this show and kind of complete that. Guys that play 3 tech and 5 tech mostly, maybe slide out even further than that, 7 tech. And not guys that are not edge rushers, quote unquote, because we'll have a separate show for it, just edge rushers.
So Lamar King went to Saginaw Valley State.
That's what it was. Yes. Yeah. Lamar King, though, that name stuck with me, but
yeah,
interesting. That was a really bad draft choice.
Yeah.
Cause he was did they pick him at the end of the first round, or was that early second round?
I think it was the end of the first.
Yeah. It was such a reach.
It was round 1, pick 22.
Oh, what a overdraft.
Yep.
Ugh. Wow. And the kids showed up and just couldn't hang. Like it was just, it was tough. It was tough. I felt bad for him because, you can't, when you're a player, you can't dictate where you go in the draft. And they drafted him. And man, just washed out. Did he ever play? Like, I don't even think he played.
No, he did some. He stuck around for a little bit. I can give you some, he had,
And I'm not comparing Darius Alexander to Lamar King, but
career, he played 5 years in Seattle.
Wow.
57 games, 125 tackles, 12 sacks.
Okay. So he gave you a little bit of something, but
that's not a first. That is not first round.
That's 2 years worth of production, though.
Yeah.
Right. In 5 years.
Yeah. Not in 5 years. That is not a first round level of production. That's a miss in the draft.
Yeah.
Sometimes you draft a guy in the first round and it's a miss, but it's because they get hurt. And I have a hard time faulting GMs for that because you can't see the future. And if it's a legit, talent, but they happen to get hurt and it's like, okay, well, that just didn't work out. When a guy is healthy and unproductive, that's a miss by the GM. You screwed up there somewhere. And that was definitely a screw up there by the Seahawks.
So we're going to have another mock draft here very soon, Keith, so that we can account for all of our new draft picks and draft positioning and our current roster, which is kind of coming together. I mean, obviously we're going to still be short on tackles and guards, not counting the internal development I think the team is counting on. I keep hearing this over and over from Mike McDonald and John Schneider, that they're really confident in their coaching staff to develop our current players, and then the current staff has measured their current roster against some of the free agents that have been coming through the building and so forth, and have decided to pass on all these free agents and just kind of go into the draft with these apparent needs, which is a horrible way to approach the draft. And at the position that has the most microscopic focus on it from a fan base that is just literally has a very short leash now for John Schneider. Like if he doesn't nail this, it doesn't fix this, quote unquote, offensive line this year, he's gone.
Well, the offensive line has been an issue now for years. And like we keep pointing it out, like the offensive line is bad, fix it. And it keeps getting worse instead of better. And for him to go into this offseason and his words, we know where our deficiencies are. We know we need to fix this. And then to do nothing like that, that's going to hurt. Like he's going to have a hard time justifying, where they are. And the fact that
rookies are rookies too, man. If you don't pick a rookie at 18 to start on your offensive line, the chances of finding a rookie in the draft in rounds 2 through 4 that are going to come in and immediately start for you and have a good solid grade and an impact that aren't going to hurt your team are very small. Like even a guard or a tackle at 18 is no guarantee that they're going to come in and immediately be a success. I mean, you really have to hit. So it almost makes me wonder if they plan on drafting 3 interior offensive linemen in this draft so that at least they have 3 lottery pulls to at least have one of them hit. Because what other option do you have? Like there had to be a plan, right? Like, so their plan, they must be looking at like potential cap cuts still, or potential camp casualties like roster cuts, cut downs, and in-season trade stuff where they feel like there's still not just the draft available to them, there is still other abilities and other resources to be able to build this line before September 5th, because depending on the draft to hit is a very, very risky proposition at best.
Yeah. Whatever happened to Garrett Bradbury? Did he ever get signed by anyone?
I think he signed right away. Yeah, he was out there for all of two days or something like that. You'd have to go Google him, but yeah, I think I can't remember where he signed, but he signed immediately.
Oh, with the Patriots. Okay. Yeah, he was one of those. I'm like, guys like that. Was a salary cap, let go. 29 years old, good player. Didn't even get him into town.
Right. Which tells you, it's either tells you something about the front office and their inability to prioritize getting guys in, or it tells you something about Oluwatimi and Jalen Sundell that they really like. And I've heard that over and over and over again. Like they really like them and they think that they're going to be better fits in this scheme versus the last one.
Yeah, but we've seen Oluwatimi get dominated. Now, in the run game, yes, he's a better fit in this other scheme than what they used to have. He'll be better as a run blocker, but we've watched him get dominated in pass blocking situations. Are we really going to run that back out there?
Yeah, we are.
I mean, Sundell offers more upside to me, but we'll see. I mean, he was so not ready for prime time in terms of just development last year, but they kept him around because they saw the clear potential. I'm hoping that he develops because he's a guy that at least has a ceiling where he doesn't get dominated right up the gut on passing downs.
Honestly, I'm at a point now where I want, Oluwatimi or Jalen Sundell to win that center spot. I want Christian Haynes to end up winning that right guard spot. And I want them to draft a starting left guard in the draft at 18 or, somewhere in the second round. Because that to me is the only viable path this year, and I think that's the plan, honestly. I mean, what else could you point to that is an actual plan other than that that this team has now after passing over free agency completely? There's nobody else out there that's going to come in and start for your team unless it's some injury riddled guy or, some camp cut that will happen ultimately, but you're still getting a guy that's being cut for a reason. It's very short-sighted to me, I think. But you got to build through the draft. We've got 10 picks. We've got 5 in the first 92. There is an opportunity here to get starting caliber talent in the interior offensive line out of this draft. I really like the talent in this draft, but it seems like it's really overconfidence to think that you're going to end up getting a real starter immediately out of the draft, and that's your only plan. I mean, that just seems weird to me.
It is, and it's confusing. It just is very confusing. That what your deficiencies are, but you're not addressing them. It's hard to defend. And you can say, well, it didn't work out. The guys signed for more than we were willing to pay them, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe you should have been willing to pay them more.
Yeah. Well, and there's no surplus on this roster as well at any different position group where you could say, hey, listen, we could package a deal with a draft pick and a player to go get a starting caliber guard for this roster. I just don't know who that would be. I guess you could trade like a Nwaso for a guard at some team that was a little desperate for some edge help. But
yeah,
I don't know. Okay. So next show, we're going to do defensive ends. primarily, and let's see how many we have. We might combine that with edges. I don't know. We'll see. And then after that, we'll get into linebackers. We'll get into safeties. Finish out with corners, and we'll be good to go. And then the draft is going to be right around the corner. Yeah, literally almost a month.
We're pretty much done with free agency, and the draft is coming. So it's a fun time of year.
All right. Go find Keith on Blue Sky at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk, the show Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find us on your favorite podcast platforms and our YouTube channel. And we will see you next time. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.